Recorded Books and One Click Digital present A Little in Love by Susan E. Fletcher. Narrated by Melody Grove.
Et puis, tenez, Monsieur Marius, je crois que j'étais un peu amoureuse de vous. You know, Monsieur Marius, I think I was a little in love with you. Victor Hugo, Les Misérables. Rue de la Chanvrerie, 5th of June, 1832. I'm dying. There's no use hoping I'll live or telling myself, keep going, it's only a small wound. There's too much blood on the ground. I'm going to die in this street. I can hardly breathe. My hand, my arm, and my body are so full of pain. I'm whimpering, trembling, and I'm cold too, lying on my back with the cobblestones pressing into me. In the distance are horses' hooves, and someone is shouting, "Is anyone alive out there?" I want to call, "Yes, over here!" But I can't. It hurts too much to speak or move. I can smell gunpowder and burning wood. The barricade's still alight, filling the air with thick black smoke. It protected us for a while, this wall, but not now. The soldiers broke through it, set it on fire with their musket shots. It's crackling near me, turning to ash, and like all the people who are dying on this street, it will be cold by morning. I will be cold by morning. I blink. I can see stars through the smoke. Too many to ever count, millions and millions. What are they thinking as they look down? Perhaps they're sad because Paris is burning, because so many good people are dead. The stars, they've always felt like my friends. They're like tiny, shining faces I've known all my life. When I've been scared or can't sleep, they've been there to keep me company. I've done so many bad things in my life, but the stars always forgave me. I whisper to them now, "Can you hear me? I'm so scared. Please don't let it hurt so much." But how can they stop me bleeding? No one can. Please. My eyes fill with tears. What will stop the pain? And how can I stop being afraid? I don't want to die. Not tonight. And not like this. Maybe it'll help to think of happy times and the beautiful things in my life. I close my eyes very tightly. Yes, that's better. I can see a bird singing, a peach tree, a full moon over the rooftops of Paris, a rainbow, my brother's freckled face, flowers in hedgerows that made the lane smell lovely. And him. I open my eyes. Him. Marius. Yes, I'll think of Marius because he makes me happy. He always has, from the first time I saw him in the Gorbeau tenement. He's kind and shy, and he hums without knowing it, and once he held my hand on a sunlit street. Is he near me? Is that him shouting, "Is anyone alive?" I try to sit up, to call out, but I can't, for the pain is like a fire shooting through me. Instead, I whisper, "Stars, bring him to me." He'd make this hurt less, I know. He'd smile very gently. He'd crouch down and say, "Shh, Eponine, I'm here. See?" I don't think I'd be frightened of dying if he was by my side. The nearby church clock is chiming, 11 times. My teeth are chattering. I'm so tired, so cold. I close my eyes again. For a moment, I see Cosette. Then I see rain. It's rain through a window. There are ditches full of water. I can see a horse, too, and she's so wet she's turned from grey to black. Where's my mother? Downstairs. My body lies in a Paris street, surrounded by corpses and my own blood and a burning barricade, but my head and its thoughts are in Montfermeil. How old am I in Montfermeil? I'm 3. And I'm in a blue pinafore, watching the rain. What did I know back then? Some things. But I didn't know, couldn't even imagine the life that lay ahead for me, or that I'd ever fall in love. Or that I'd put my hand in front of a soldier's gun to save that boy's life, and bleed to death for him. Book 1. Montfermeil. I was born in the year of 1815. That was a hard year. In the summer they had a battle called Waterloo, and all the village's men fought in it, far away. There weren't many left in Montfermeil to cut the hay or bale it, to wring the necks of chickens or shoe horses or chop wood. I was walking, Maman told me. Then I felt you coming. The grass was waist high, so I just squatted down in it. That was my arrival. While Papa was fighting in a muddy field, my mother was cursing. She pushed me out into thistles and hay. You were a girl, so of course I kept you, she said. She never liked boys. After the battle, Papa came back. Many men didn't return, but he did. He didn't have a scratch on him, and he clinked with coins that he'd stolen from the pockets of dying men. Once, he told me about it. Picking his teeth, he said, I pretended I was helping them, but I wasn't. Ha! I was taking their pennies and silver crosses. Well, the dead don't need money, do they? That was my father, Luc Thénardier, thin with a greying, bristled chin. His eyes were quick like a rat's, quick and cunning and black. He smoked a pipe. It yellowed the ends of his fingers and left a dent in his lip. The Battle of Waterloo made him rich. With dead men's money, he bought himself a new hat and a pocket watch. For Maman, he bought a cape edged with fur. I'm not sure what he thought of me, his new baby daughter, but I know what he thought of the empty inn in Montfermeil. It sat at the end of the Ruelle de Boulanger. Maman told me how they walked there one summer's evening, arm in arm, to look at it. It was damp and crooked. Its windows were greenish with moss. Birds and spiders nested in its eaves. Papa rubbed his chin and said, Why don't we buy it, ma chère? She scowled. Buy it? Why? It's falling down. It is. But there aren't any other inns for miles and miles. People would come. And there's money to be made from drunken men. So they picked the moss from its glass with their fingernails and swept the bigger spiders out into the yard. My father called the inn the Sergeant of Waterloo. Named, he told his customers, after myself and my own brave role in the battle. Papa told lies all the time, and Maman would listen to them, polishing glasses and admiring him, this man who'd plucked buttons from dying soldiers' coats and then left those men to die in the rain. My parents. This inn was my home. I was born in a bright hayfield, but I grew up in a dark stone tavern with nettles by its door. Its sign creaked back and forth. Mice scurried behind my bedroom wall at night. I think I remember my sister being born. It was October when the leaves were crispy brown. But my first proper memory came when I was 3. It's clear and real like cupped water. It begins with water too. Weeks and weeks of it. A month of rain.
It always rains in March, said Maman. Don't sulk. It'll stop soon enough.
But it didn't. For weeks, it drummed on the windows and turned the ditches to mud. The old nag's drinking trough was filled to the brim. Poor horse, I whispered to myself, because she was so wet she'd changed colour. She shivered, ears back. All the fields flooded. From my bedroom window, I saw the drooping apple trees and Monsieur Fournier's cows huddling on high ground. The farmers couldn't grow their barley or corn in such wet earth. It ran like wormy soup through their hands. They'd shake their heads very sadly. Then they'd trudge into our inn and stare into their drinks with a sigh. Fires hissed with soggy wood. Water dripped off the brims of hats.
A dry village? Ha!
Papa sucked on his pipe.
But still, the rain has advantages. They leave their wet coats by the fire to dry, so it's much easier to pick their pockets.
He gave a soft cackle.
Always a penny or two.
Montfermeil was a small woodland village, 17 miles east of Paris. It had a few grand houses with balconies, but mostly it was made of little huts where the poorer people lived. Like Madame Coo, who talked to herself, and blind Roland with his milky eyes. At the cottage with 2 chimneys lived Monsieur and Madame Lefebvre, who were always side by side, just like their chimneys. They held hands and sang to each other.
Disgusting,
Papa called them.
Lovesick idiots.
There was also a butcher's shop and a blacksmith's shed and a church with a graveyard where the widow Amandine kneeled every day. At the edge of the village was old Auguste's house, and he had a tree with sweet, juicy peaches. The bees loved that fruit as much as I did. In the summer, his tree hummed. Montfermeil sat on the top of a hill. A road ran through it, the road between Livry and Chelles. But no river or stream could reach all the way up to us, so we didn't have any choice except to walk with our buckets to get water. Deep in the tangled woods there was a spring. Mostly we paid old Père Six-Four to fetch the water for us, but he was crooked and spilled more than he carried. He stumbled over tree roots and wouldn't work at night. Maman didn't like him.
He's useless, she said. You'll be fetching the water yourself when you're older, Eponine. Understand?
I nodded but felt frightened. They said the woods were haunted, and there were stories of witches too. So these weeks and weeks of rain were unexpected. When had there ever been a puddle on each gravestone? A drip, drip, drip from each leaf? Perhaps there'll be fish in the potholes and we can eat them, I thought. Maybe we should build a boat. I knew that Bible tale. I was sitting by my bedroom window. There was a seat there, a small padded shelf, and I sat with my knees pressed to my chest, resting my chin on them. My pinafore was corduroy, blackish blue. From here, I watched the rain. I watched the people hurrying through it, Claude the blacksmith splashing, and Marie-Belle with her hunched back. The road mender, called Boulatruelle, stalked by in a long black coat, and I shuddered when I saw him because they said he'd been in prison for killing a man.
Walk past,
I thought. Don't come in here. Because I never liked it when he drank in our inn. He'd whisper with Papa in corners. Once I heard him say, "There are candlesticks in the church at Gagny." "Silver?" Papa replied. "Silver. The door's locked, but it isn't strong. We could break it." I knew many things. Where the blackberries grew in the autumn, and where raspberries grew in July. How my mother's face glowed when she found any shiny thing, a ring or gold or glass beads. She'd cry, "Look how they sparkle! Oh, oh, look!" I knew too that after Waterloo, a man called Napoleon had been sent away, and that some people missed him and wanted him back. Not everyone liked the French king. I heard Père Cisse mutter, "Was the revolution for nothing? All those people died, and what for? We're all still so poor." Eponine. I was named after a girl in my mother's favourite book. Maman was broad and sly, and her voice boomed like a cannon, but she liked romance novels with names like The Beautiful Maid of Nanterre, or The Queen's Lover, or Secrets in Montmartre. She'd tuck herself up and sigh as she read them, her stories of beauty and love. But as I sat on the window seat that evening, I didn't know, how could I, who was walking towards Montfermeil at that very moment, who was trudging through the rainy fields and lanes. A Daughter's Task. "Eponine? Eponine, where are you?" Maman's voice, loud and demanding. It grew louder as she climbed the stairs towards me. Then she threw open the door. "So, there you are." She filled the doorway. She was tall as a man, much taller than Papa, with fleshy arms and legs. She stood with her hands on her hips and looked about her. In the stairwell behind her, a candle was glowing. It lit up the sides of her coppery hair. There was the single, impatient tap of her foot. "What's this? Sitting? Watching the rain as if there is nothing else to do?" She clicked her tongue. "You've got work tonight, my darling." She walked over and took my hand. I stumbled off the window seat. With my hand in hers, I was pulled from the room. We went down the creaking stairs, past the dusty corners and the black speckles that the mice had left behind, past the cracked window. I felt its chilly draught. "Keep up!" Downstairs, the inn had only 2 rooms. One was the kitchen. It brimmed with frothing pots and pans. The sink was half full of brown water and vegetable peelings and lumps of fat. Meat, hams, rabbits, pheasants, hung from hooks above my head. I didn't like this room. I never had. I hated its greasy walls and sticky floors, and I hated the cook who helped my mother sometimes, a sour-faced man who tugged the necks of hens and smiled when he heard the bones crack. I hurried through it. Above me, the rabbits swayed with their dead, glassy eyes. We came to the heavy oak door. Maman crouched. "Now, listen. The inn," she said, "is full tonight. Full. We have the rain to thank for that. The road to Chelles is flooded, so carts can't get through it, and even those travelling on foot would soak themselves to the knee. So here they all are, our travelling folk, unable to reach Paris and wanting a hot meal and bed." She took my chin between her thumb and forefinger. "You know what this means, don't you?" "Yes. There are lots of people." "Which means?" "More pockets to steal from." "Yes. And what will you look for?" "Coins, Maman." "Of course, coins. And jewellery."
pocket watches, eyeglasses, any fine leather. And I'm fond of embroidery, aren't I? She spat on her finger, rubbed my cheek with it. Be sweet. Be heartless. And what should you do if they see you?
Smile very prettily.
Or
Cry as if they've hurt me.
exactly. Très bon.
She narrowed her eyes, leaned closer.
Now, go and find riches. Make me happy, Eponine.
I walked into a room of roaring noise. There was shouting, singing, laughing, men spilling their ale and tearing meat from a bone, the chink of glass against glass, of metal against metal. A bowl was dropped and it broke, and a cheer followed, and a dog started barking, and someone was coughing so loudly in the corner I thought he might be choking, but then he paused, wiped his mouth with his sleeve, and drank some more. The hearth blazed, and the pipe smoke pricked my eyes. I tried to breathe through my mouth. I did this so I wouldn't smell the wet wool or the armpits. I tried to be careful where I walked. My heels went suck, suck, suck on the floor. I thought, pockets. Look for pockets. Be heartless. You know what to do. And I did. Before I could even talk, my mother taught me. When I was still a baby, she showed me how to grasp a lady's collar and, like this, steal her diamond brooch. She told me to smile so that passers-by paused to say, "What a pretty baby!" And as they did this, Maman hid their purse inside her skirts. So yes, I knew what to do. My first one was easy enough. I chose the miller from Shell. He was already wobbling on his feet. He wore his apron. There was the chalky hue of flour on his beard.
I tell you, he said, the Breton grain is bad grain. Seeds in it. Vetch, hemp seed. How can I make good flour when there are, he burped, seeds in it?
He didn't have any shiny buttons, but as he turned, I pushed my fingers inside his apron pocket. I felt the cool shape of a 1-sou coin. Next, I chose an old soldier. He was dozing by the fire with drool on his chin. He wore fine silver buckles on his shoes, and I bent down and plucked the buckles off very quickly. 1, 2. From a portly man in a waistcoat, I took a pocket watch. From the cowherd, I lifted 3 sous. There was a gentleman standing at the bar who wore a ruby ring. I saw its prettiness and I thought, Maman would be very happy with that. She'd smile and stroke my hair. How could I take it? In the end, I tiptoed up to him and shook his right hand. Monsieur? Excuse me? Have you seen my doll? He looked down, blinked at what he saw, a tiny child with big, sad eyes.
Your doll? I've seen no doll. Little girl, this room is surely no place for you, and not at this late hour.
Perhaps my doll is upstairs. I smiled sweetly, let go of his hand and moved on. The ring's warm hardness was pressed into my palm. Maman was waiting in the stairwell.
So?
I showed her. I held out my treasures in cupped hands, the buckles, the coins, the ruby ring. She smiled widely, her eyes as bright as the jewel. She slid the ring onto her finger and sighed.
Oh, so beautiful, so sparkling. Think of what we can buy with these things.
She put loud, extravagant kisses on my cheeks and said,
How I love you when you bring me such gifts, when you steal so well.
She stroked my hair as I'd hoped she would.
My clever little thief, my darling Eponine.
After that, I took myself to bed.
My sister was sleeping. Azelma, a tiny bud. She was the little life who was, at first, just a strange bump beneath my mother's dress. Later, she mewed like a kitten in our mother's arms. Now, Azelma slept beneath a blanket with her thumb in her mouth. She made soft snoring sounds. Pop, pop. And I looked at her for a moment. Then I took off my pinafore and climbed into bed. The first word she'd ever said had been, "Ponine." She'd said it holding her arms out to me, wanting to be held. In bed, her feet felt cold. I rubbed them and tucked them between my own feet to make them warm. I found her doll amongst the bedclothes and warmed her too. I brought the blankets about us. Like this, we slept so deeply that we didn't hear the cries of the soldier when he found his buckles were gone, or the miller's drunken shout of, "Thief! I had a coin in this pocket, and where is it now?" We didn't hear the rain stop either. That night, the clouds parted, the moon came out. It shone down on our inn and on two tired people who were walking towards it. Walking, walking. Two people, a mother and her child. Did they part brambles with their hands, lift their skirts as they climbed over stiles? That's how I've always imagined it. They were always beautiful. Even in damp fields, I reckon they shone as brightly as the stars. Some people have that in them, a glow, a sort of magic. They're just different from the rest of us. A day of sun. In the morning, Azelma and I stood by the window. Look! Look how pretty it is! The fields were wet and sparkling, cobwebs were silvery white. The old rusting wagon that sat outside the inn glowed in the sunshine. We heard a noise behind us. Maman cried, "My darlings, my pretty things." She was at her happiest, but I knew it wasn't because the rain had stopped. It was because of the ruby ring. "What a fine day it is." She settled beside us on the window seat. "And what a clever girl Eponine was last night. That ruby, we can sell it in shell for 100 francs, I'm sure. And I'll buy you presents, my beautiful daughters. What would you like? Lace-edge skirts, petticoats, velvet ribbons?" Azelma clapped, excited. She said, "Doll, doll." "A doll? Of course. I shall find you the finest in all of France. And Eponine? Tell your mother what you wish for." I looked at the floor. What did I want? I didn't want rabbits hanging from their hooks, dead-eyed, or to have to fetch water from the haunted woods when I was older. I didn't like Boulatruelle, the creepy road mender, whispering to my father in the dark. But these didn't sound like the right things to say, and I didn't want to make her angry. Sometimes she called me an ugly, ungrateful child. To play? Can we play outside in the sunshine? I couldn't think of anything else. She frowned, like my answer confused her. "There's nothing else?" "And a doll, please." "Aha! Of course, a doll for you too. With a porcelain face and a dainty hat. You'll be stealing again tonight, Eponine. And yes, you may play outside." We ran into the sunshine, arms wide. We jumped in puddles together and scuffed through the soaking wet grass, and I wondered if this was how birds felt when freed from their cages. At lunchtime, Maman said, "That old wagon that rusts in the lane, I wonder if I might make a swing from it. Would you like a swing of your own?" That's how we spent the afternoon, She knotted a shawl and we swung from it, a cradle hanging from the wagon's arm. We swung beneath a bright blue sky. I felt happy with Azelma's warmth against me. Don't let this moment end, I thought. I heard the woman's voice before I saw her. She said, "You have 2 very pretty children, Madame." It wasn't Madame Coo and it wasn't Widow Amandine. I sat up to see who was speaking. The lady was young. She was fair-haired and very thin, and the hem of her skirt was wet. She held the hand of a little girl, my age maybe. This girl had fair hair too. She wore a linen bonnet, but I could still see her hair. I pushed myself up to see them better. Had I ever seen a beautiful person before? The only people I knew were grey and old. These 2 looked like angels. I stared. I couldn't help it. The little girl gave a tiny smile, and I gave one back. Cosette. That night, I sat on the bedroom floor with Azelma and this girl. The cat was with us too. We all watched the cat as she licked her paws with her rough tongue. I asked the girl, "Why are you here?" It had been a strange day. We'd swung in the cradle, picked flowers from the hedgerows and stuck them in our hair. Later, I'd seen the girl's mother kneel down and say, "Come here, dear Cosette. Let me hold you." She'd hugged her daughter tightly and they'd rocked from side to side. The girl sniffed. "I think I'm staying here now." "Here? With us?" "Yes." "How long for?" "Not sure." Azelma frowned. She plucked her thumb from her mouth. "Why?" she said. The girl was still watching the cat, who was washing the end of her tail now. "My mother's poor," she whispered. "She can't really work if she's got to look after me too. I think she's left me here for a while so she can go and earn lots of money. Then she'll come back for me." Azelma tilted her head. "No, Papa?" "No. He went away and didn't come back." She began to cry then. Her eyes filled with big, wobbling tears which spilled down her cheeks and dropped onto her lap. "Ponine?" I couldn't find a handkerchief for her, but there was our doll's headscarf, which was a little flowered rag. I gave it to her. "Here, don't cry. I'm Eponine. I'm 4. This is Azelma. She's 2.5. The girl blew her nose, still crying. "What's your name?" "My proper name's Euphrasie, but—" she gulped. "But Maman calls me Cosette." Cosette. A soft name. It suited her. "Are you 4 as well?" "In the summer." She pressed the rag to her eyes. Her little mouth trembled. I wanted to help her, so I said, "Don't be sad. Your mother will come back. And Montfermeil isn't so bad. See the window seat? It is dark outside now, but sometimes, in the daytime, I sit there and see lots of things that no one else sees, like the cows scratching their bottoms on the fence, or Père Gauffin smoking when he isn't meant to smoke because his chest rattles and the smoking makes it worse. I've seen rabbits. I've seen Madame Coo picking flowers for her buttonhole, and people carrying the old nag's droppings in their arms because they say that her droppings make their cauliflowers grow. And in the summer there are swifts that swoop down the lane." I paused. Her eyes were fixed on me, and her voice was tiny. "Rabbits?" "And raspberries. I know where raspberries grow. You can pop them on the end of each finger and suck them off, like this. I pretended I wore raspberries like thimbles on each fingertip. As Alma unplugged her mouth, she laughed at this, my berries made of air. See? It isn't so bad. And when your mother comes back, you can show her the cauliflowers and the old grey nag, and you'll both be very happy. Cosette quietened. She sniffed, stroked the cat. Later, I took her to the little bed I shared with Azelma and lifted the blanket. I didn't know where else she could sleep. I climbed in beside them and blew out the light. But I couldn't sleep at first because I felt too sad. Doesn't everyone feel sad when they see another person crying? When we want to help them, but we can't? Be happy, I thought. It's been a nice day. But I stayed sad. My sadness sat in my heart like a pebble, hard and sore. Slowly, I worked out the reason for it. It wasn't Cosette's tears, after all. It was that long, tight hug that Cosette's mother had given her, the way she'd pressed her face into the place between Cosette's neck and shoulders and rocked with her, left to right. What had she whispered to her? A promise or words of love? I'd felt that pebble in my heart at other times, like when I saw people holding hands. When Monsieur Lefebvre kissed his wife's forehead as she snoozed in the sun. I turned onto my side in bed. I thought how pretty Cosette was. She had apple-round cheeks and golden hair, and her eyes were cornflower blue. My own cheeks were hollow. My hair was full of knots. I was only called pretty when I'd stolen things. I slept in the end, but even in my dreams, I felt the tiny pebble in my heart. A drafty sleeping place. In the middle of the night, the door was thrown open. The back of the door hit the bedroom wall, and a lantern's light filled the room. Maman stumbled in. She smelt of gin and wood smoke. "What?" she roared. "Is this?" She tore the blanket from us and pulled Cosette out of bed. She grabbed Cosette's hair and lifted her up. The girls screamed, and Azelma started crying, and the cat who had been sleeping on the window seat shot out of the room, and my mother was hissing. "What is this?" As if she'd found a rat and was holding it by the tail. Cosette squirmed in the air. Then she fell down onto her knees. "How dare you?" snarled Maman. "Share my daughter's bed? How dare you? Do you think you have the right to use our blankets, our heat? Do you?" I hurried to my mother, said, "Maman!" "Don't come to me, Eponine. What were you thinking? Did I say that you could have that little louse in your own bed? Did I say that?" "No, Maman, but—" "Enough. You," she pointed at Cosette, "downstairs. You'll sleep under the stairs where the dust gathers and the spiders live. That is your bed. Do you hear?" Azelma sobbed, but Cosette didn't. She just knelt very still, wide-eyed. "Go!" Maman roared. Cosette got up and ran downstairs. Then my mother turned. "Eponine?" It was her slow, warning voice. "Maman, I did not know where else she might sleep. She was cold." "Cold? What does that matter? Listen to me. That girl, she isn't a Thénardier like us. She is the bastard child of a slum-dwelling woman who cannot afford to feed her own daughter. Her mother is paying for us to keep her. Paying for her food and clothing. And do you think we will spend that money on her?" She bared her teeth in a cunning smile. "No, we won't. That money will be spent on us, Eponine. will use it for fine clothes and jewels and meat, and she spat the word, will wear rags. She will eat crusts, and she'll do all the jobs I tell her to. Maman folded her arms. What do you think of that? I felt afraid. So I can't play with her? No. She is our slave now. Understand me? Don't show kindness to that poor, fatherless brat. Maman narrowed her eyes. And anyway, Eponine, you should be pleased. I was going to send you for water when you were older, remember? To go through the woods at night. Well, she can do that job now. She left, slammed the door. I made the bed tidy. I looked for Azelma's doll and tucked her under my sister's arm. There, there, I said to her. Soon she was sleeping, and I heard the little pops of her breath. The pebble of sadness was still in me, but I felt relief too, because I was so scared of those woods where Boulatruelle lurked and witches lived. Now I didn't have to go there. It was her task, that fatherless brat. I tried out those words, who was sleeping under the stairs. Sackcloth and silk. She didn't wear her linen bonnet anymore, nor her ribbon frock or satin shoes. Instead, Cosette wore a sack from the miller's house meant for flour, but which was too thin in places to keep the flour in. Maman cut 2 holes into the sack for her arms and a larger hole at the top for her head. That, she said, is your new dress. Not such a pretty thing now. Cosette did all the bad jobs. She worked in the kitchen. Amongst the grease and black-bodied flies, she plucked chickens and scraped the scales off fish. She scrubbed vegetables and sliced fatty meat and wrinkled her nose at the pails of soured milk. When the cook carried rabbits by their ears, still alive, kicking, into the yard to have their necks snapped, Cosette cried for them. Then she scoured their blood from the kitchen floor. She cleaned the windows and washed our clothes. She ate from a bowl under the kitchen table, kneeling on all fours. Like an animal, said Maman, laughing. Look at her, just like the cat. She's so dirty, with fleas and thistles in her hair. I didn't have to steal any more. Every month, Cosette's mother sent 15 francs. With this, my parents could pay for their tobacco and ale and gin and flour and milk and firewood and eggs. They could pay for a hock of ham instead of stealing it. I didn't have to dip my fingers into pockets. This was new. In the evenings, when the inn was full, Azelma and I weren't creeping through the room now. We were sitting upstairs instead. Would Maman want us? It felt very strange. We drew on the window's mist with our fingers. We played with the doll and sang. But Maman didn't come. Part of me was glad because I didn't like the inn being smoky and noisy and full of men. But part of me felt sorry too, because I didn't know how else to make our mother smile and say, "Oh, my pretty ones." Spring crept on. March became April, and April became May. Sunshine brought the villagers out. Cosette stayed indoors, sweeping, but the rest of us came out into the flowery warmth. Marie-Belle, with her hunched back, sat on a bench and read. Monsieur Fournier's cows munched buttercups. Claude the blacksmith, seeing the sun, worked outside in the street, and I heard the ting-ting-ting of his hammer and the hiss of the shoe as he pressed it onto the horse. One morning, as we watched this, Azelma and me, I saw how the tools on his belt were shiny. I wondered if I might take one, and what Maman would say. Maman appeared. She stepped out of the inn in her prettiest dress, rustling as she walked. "How do I look?" she cried. We left the blacksmith's and ran to her. "Am I very beautiful?" "You are! You are!" We clapped our hands. "I'm going to Paris," she declared. "See these bags? They are filled with that urchin's clothes. Fancy frilly nonsense. Her mother sent them, but that bug cannot scrub floors in such dresses, can she? So I'm off to Paris to sell them, and with the money they fetch I shall buy you far prettier dresses than these vile things. Satin, silk." She turned. "Luke, my hat." Papa stood in the doorway. He tossed her a hat, took the pipe from his mouth and said, "Get what you can, and more." "I will." She kissed our heads, 2 smacking kisses. At that moment, a carriage appeared. It would take her to Livry, and from there a second coach would take her to Paris itself. She heaved herself inside it with a bag of clothes. We watched the coach rumble away down the Ruelle de Boulanger. Papa said, "She'd better come back with 100 at least." 100 francs, I gasped. The clothes are worth that? "No, but she'll be doing more than selling clothes." He placed the pipe back in his mouth, gripped it with his teeth. "We know all the best places in Paris." "To visit?" He laughed. "Ha! No, to steal from, you fool." And he turned and went inside. Azelma followed him, but I stayed in the lane. I watched the carriage grow smaller and smaller. I thought, all we do is steal. It seemed to be all we ever did or talked about. Wasn't there another way of living? I remembered the hug Cosette's mother had given her. I looked up at the swifts, swooping. For the first time, I hoped for something better, for something more than Montfermeil, and this. Paris. I knew its name. I'd heard it mentioned in the street as the carriage rolled by, or as the blacksmith tended to horses. At the markets in Chelles they called, "The finest lace from the streets of Paris, come and see." Madame Cou said she'd worked there once as a dancer in a part called Montparnasse. "Paris," she murmured, like she loved it very much. Maman was in Paris for 3 days. Back in Montfermeil, it was all I could think of. What was it like? I imagined boulevards, wide streets lined with trees that whispered in the wind, tall houses made of stone, and horses which shone as if polished. Men were handsome, tilting their hats when they passed a fine lady, and those ladies wore fox fur and pearls. Even the names of places sounded beautiful. Notre Dame, the hill called Montmartre, La Seine, and the Champ du Mars. It felt like a magical place. One evening I crept into the half-empty bar. My father was playing dominoes with Boulatruelle and some other men. "Papa?" "Hmm?" He kept his eyes on the game. "Will you tell me more about what Paris is like?" "Paris? Grubby and dark? Alleyways to hide in?" I didn't want to know that. "I mean, are the ladies very beautiful?" Boulatruelle cackled and Papa shook his head. "Not the ladies I've known. Let me tell you this. Paris is perfect for thieving in, and that's all. At La Grève, for example, everyone's too busy watching the guillotine to feel a hand in their pocket. Ha!" I felt sad. These weren't the tales I'd hoped for. I knew Père Gauffin had been to Paris, so I asked him instead.
Oh, he sighed. It was a fine city once. It might be fine again, but as long as there's a rich, plump king and starving people.
He coughed his rattling cough.
It's got its troubles.
Madame Coup didn't like company, so I couldn't ask her. Widow Amandine said,
Paris? I've never been.
It was Maman's romance books I turned to in the end. In them, I found my gentlemen with gold-topped canes and perfumed ladies who fluttered their eyes behind fans. Notre Dame's polished stones reflected the sun. People fell in love on the Paris streets. I sighed. I lay down The Beauty of Bellevue and looked out of the bedroom window. It was my favourite daydream that one day I'd be pretty and I'd walk with a boy on the Rue Rivoli in a skirt that went shush, shush, shush. Maman came back looking flushed. She stepped down from the coach in an embroidered cape which trailed behind her, and she smelt musky, strange.
Maman, what did you see?
She swayed up the path, past the nettles.
Where's your father? Find him. Tell him I have money.
And gifts, chirped Azelma.
Oui, ma chérie. And gifts.
I was given a shiny petticoat and a white fur muff for the winter. Azelma got a cape with a green velvet trim. She danced in it, singing, "Look at me! Look at me!" Papa was handed a clinking drawstring pouch full of coins. Cosette? She got nothing. She crept out of the shadows that evening as we were eating roasted goose.
What do you want?
Maman barked.
Why aren't you fetching water? Go and get it.
I stopped chewing. I thought, poor Cosette, because it was pitch black outside and she must have been so hungry. But she said nothing. She only trembled, nodded and reached for the bucket. The goose tasted bitter after that. I found her later. She'd fetched the water and was huddled on her bed under the stairs, whimpering. Cosette? She looked afraid. Maybe she'd thought I was Maman. Don't worry. She's sleeping and Papa is counting his francs in the bar. They won't see this. I held out my hands. I'd saved some of the goose for her. She stared. For me? Yes. She made small, soft noises as she ate. I saw the blisters on her hand and her flaking lips. You've been asking people about Paris, haven't you? She said, swallowing. My mother knows Paris. Really? She met my father there. She said they walked along the riverbank and he took her to theatres where the lanterns are made of gold. This was what I'd wanted. Thank you. Cosette wiped her mouth. We looked at each other and smiled. It was like we'd both given something the other person needed, a little bit of nourishment. Mine for her body, and hers for my soul. A little kindness. I sometimes think we're like the flowers. We don't need very much to grow, just food, water, and light. The hedgerows in Montfermeil were filled with flowers that summer. They spilled over walls into the Ruelle de Boulanger so that they brushed the carriages that trundled past. The lanes were so colourful, blue anemones and pink roses and the tiny yellow daisy's eye. Nobody cared for these flowers, and yet they grew. People gazed at their prettiness or stooped from their horse to pick a bloom or two. Cosette didn't see any of it. She was indoors all the time, scrubbing the kitchen floor or darning our clothes. We ate raspberries and played in the fields, but she didn't. In September, she dropped a glass and it smashed, and Maman screamed at her, "You horrid, clumsy beast!" She hit Cosette so that she had bruises for weeks. But she still had to fetch the water. "Off into the woods," cried Maman. "Go. I don't care if it's cold or scary out there. And don't spill a drop, do you hear?" Cosette wept very quietly when she lay down that night. I heard her. By November, some nights were so frosty and cold that I worried she might freeze to death in her sackcloth dress out in those spooky woods. But she always came back, shivering with cold, but alive. She was like the flowers in the lane, maybe. Nobody cared for her, but she still grew, and she was pretty. Prettier than Azelma and me. "She isn't a Thénardier," Maman said. "You don't want to fetch the water yourself, do you?" I definitely didn't, but I didn't like seeing Cosette's bruises or hearing her little moans at night. It was a wintry day when I decided to help. The fire in our bedroom kept us warm, but all the other rooms were icy cold. Even the cat stayed near us. But Cosette was scrubbing the back doorstep. She was kneeling with a bucket of water beside her, scrubbing very slowly back and forth. Her skin was pimply and blue, and at that moment she knocked the bucket over. It clattered and its water raced across the yard. Cosette wailed, "No!" and tried to dam the water with her hands, but she couldn't stop it. The bucket was empty. She gave a single sob. She'd have to fetch more water now, and it was getting dark. "Cosette," I whispered. She was all teary-eyed. "There's a trick I know. Give me the bucket." She didn't move. "The bucket. Cosette, you don't have to go in the woods. The old nag in the field, she has a drinking trough. It's not good water because it's green with insects in it, and people can't drink it. But you could scrub a floor with it. The bucket, quick." I reached out my hand. I ran from the inn in my silk petticoats and climbed over the gate. I broke the icy crust on the water trough, filled the bucket up. When I returned, her eyes were as big as saucers. I said, "When you're done, come upstairs. Papa is teaching Azelma how to cheat at cards in the bar, and Maman is drinking with men, so they won't know if you come up to warm your hands." I tried to smile. "I won't tell." I remember how she crouched by the fire with her eyes closed as she soaked up its heat, like the flowers which turn their faces to the warmth of the sun. "Thank you," she whispered after a little while, and she padded back downstairs. I liked being kind to her. It felt much better than stealing or being mean. I was frightened that Maman might find out, but how could she? I thought my secret was safe. But in the morning, Widow Amandine knocked on our door. She owned the old grey nag and, like the nag, she had big teeth and a swaying bottom. "Monsieur and Madame Thénardier?" My parents were suspicious. "Oui." "Please keep that eldest daughter of yours from stealing my horse's water. I saw her yesterday. She took a whole bucketful. It is theft. Theft, I tell you. I pay Père 6 for that water, don't I?" "You're mistaken," said Maman, but her voice sounded tight. "I saw her, madame, and if it happens again, I will bring the gendarme from Chelles, and I'm sure you wouldn't want that." She snorted, turned, and swung her bottom down the lane. Maman slammed the door and bellowed, "Eponine!" She found me on the stairs, seized me by the wrist and said, "What's this? Taking water from a drinking trough? Did you? Answer me."
"But you like stealing, Maman."
"Don't be sassy with me. Why did you do it? It's Cosette's job to fetch the water, that horrid bony thing." She brought her face closer to mine. "Were you helping her?" I paused. "You were, weren't you? You were helping that stinking little—" Maman hissed in disgust. "Don't you remember what I told you, Eponine? That," she pointed down the stairs where Cosette was huddling, "isn't a Thénardier. Why should we be kind to her?"
"Because it's nice to be kind."
"Nice? Nice?" She kicked the cat as it passed her. "I shan't say this twice, so listen well. Kindness is a useless thing. Useless. Do you think that kindness stops the guillotine's blade, or the gnaw of hunger in a belly, or the grey hairs creeping onto a man's head? Do you think a kind man's body won't be sucked by worms? These are dangerous times, Eponine, and people will steal and trick and lie and kill if they have to. And it is the kind people who are tricked and fooled and stolen from. It's the kind ones who are murdered. Do you want that to be you?"
"No, Maman."
"Then be cruel. Cruel. It's what will save you. And," she grasped my collar, "if you cannot be cruel, and if you cannot be hard, then I'm not sure you're my daughter at all."
She let go, folded her arms. I was shocked. "Not your daughter?"
"Maybe not. Maybe it's only Azelma who's my daughter, for she is growing hard. She does not help that snivelling wretch. And if you aren't a Thénardier, why must we keep you?"
I was frightened, and I reached out for her. "No, Maman. I am your daughter. I can be cruel."
She eyed me. "Can you?"
"Yes, very cruel. You'll see."
"You must prove it."
I will. I will prove it."
She sniffed. She bent down and kissed my head. "Good."
I wondered then what kind of flower I was, because I drank up my mother's kiss like it was water, as if it hadn't rained for months.
"Promise me."
"I promise. I'll be hard and cruel." Being cruel. I wasn't kind to Cosette again. I'd promised Maman I'd be hard and cruel, and so I was. I watched how Maman did it, for being cruel was easy to her. She'd push Cosette as she passed her and call her names. She'd look at the newly scrubbed floor and say, "It's filthy. Scrub that again." Or she'd point at the bleeding cracks on Cosette's heels and call out, "A cow! A cow! Look, she has hooves." "A cow would be more useful," said Papa through his pipe. I began with tiny things. I called her ugly, or I'd stomp on the stairs when she was sleeping. I waited until she'd finished mopping the floor, and then I walked across it in my muddy shoes, saying, "Oops," in a very casual way. I also told Cosette that her mother was probably much happier without her. Maybe she's never coming back. And this made Cosette cry. Maman overheard this. She smiled at me. As for Azelma, she soon stopped sucking her thumb and started sucking her meat instead, licking her plate. By the time she was 6, she could burp like a man. She'd run to Papa, even though he had a horrible bristly chin and a smelly mouth, and say, "Papa, show me how to—"
She wanted to know how to fill liquor bottles with water and cheat at dominoes. He showed her, saying, "What a fine crook you're becoming," and Azelma squirmed with delight. She was very cruel, too. She hid Cosette's blanket when snow was due and threw stones at her. She started eating her food very lavishly, licking her lips and singing out, "Oh, this duck is delicious, maman. So rich and tasty. Cosette, how is your blackened bread?" Or, "How is your apple with worms in?" Maman laughed and coddled her, saying, "Well done, my darling, well done." Maybe it was because we ate too much or threw too many logs on the fire, but as the months slipped by, so did the money. Maman tried to save. She'd tell Cosette to darn a torn bodice instead of buying a new one. She used fewer candles and less powder on her face, and she raged at the cost of things, milk from Monsieur Fournier or a sack of flour. How much? They should be ashamed. Robbery, that is. I said, "Does that ugly pig under the stairs need 3 pieces of bread a day? Let's give her 2, because that's more bread for us." Maman's eyes shone. Good girl, Eponine. But it got worse. The small white envelopes that Cosette's mother sent every month with 15 francs inside stopped coming. Papa stamped his foot. "Where the hell is this month's money from that brat's mother?" Maman muttered, "She's stopped paying." "What?" "Write to her. Demand that she pays. Tell her that, what's her name, Colette, is ill and needs 50 francs for medicine or she'll die. That should do it." But it didn't. Maman wrote letters, but no money came. "Maybe she's died herself," she muttered. "How selfish that would be. How are we meant to buy petticoats if that yellow-haired strumpet is dead?" So it was back to thieving. Azelma and I were given orders. "Out! Out! Steal what you can, my darling ones." I went to the market at Chelles. It was a noisy place with dancing girls and fortune-tellers and a pig roasting on a spit, and it was easy to steal from here. Buttons, purses, and a jar of honey. I went to Claude the blacksmith too. He didn't have much money, but he had a fine glossy horse tied up outside, and I thought, such a horse must belong to a very rich man. I slipped my hand into its saddlebags and found a bone-handled knife. It might be useful one day. I wanted to make Maman happy, so I stole whatever I could, and from everyone. One Sunday, I stole from church. People wear their best clothes to church after all, and I stole a cross-shaped brooch, a lace-edged handkerchief, and some white gloves. As Widow Amandine kneeled beside her husband's grave, I unclasped her necklace and ran home with it, thinking, "Maman will be so pleased with me." I stole from blind Roland, too. He was standing in the street, and his eyes were open, but I knew he couldn't see. He called, "Who's there? Please talk to me. I'm blind and can't see you." His wedding ring was on his finger. His wife had died in childbirth many years before. I tugged the ring off, ran away. "Come back! Please come back! Not my wedding ring!" But I didn't stop running. Be heartless, Maman had told me, and I'd vowed to be hard and cruel. "Oh, clever, Eponine," she said. But I couldn't sleep that night, thinking about poor blind Roland and poor Widow Amandine. When I went downstairs for a glass of water, I tripped over Cosette. She gasped, sat up. Eponine, she whispered, is it true? Did you steal the wedding ring from that poor blind man? My belly knotted with shame. I almost said, yes, it's true, and I feel awful about it. But I promised Maman, so I put my hands on my hips and said, yes, it's true. So what? I spat at her, kicked her, and walked away. It was a horrible thing to do. That wedding ring was all blind Roland had left to touch of his wife. He used to turn that ring over and over and kiss it, pretending the ring was her. I heard his cries of desperation again. Come back, I beg you, not my wedding ring. I felt so ashamed. The next day, I wanted to be alone, so I hid behind a stone wall where the roses grew in summer. It was September now, but a few roses were still out. As I sat, I heard voices. It was Monsieur and Madame Lefebvre, who lived in the house with 2 chimneys side by side, as they always were. They couldn't see me because I was hidden, but I could hear them talking. Every day, I love you more, said Monsieur Lefebvre. There was the neat pop of a rose being picked. For you. Oh, Gustave, and I love you too. I heard them kiss, and then they walked on. Afterwards, I wrapped my arms around my shins and I cried. I felt so sad because of the blind man and Widow Amandine, but also because the pebble in my heart was back, going, knock, knock, knock. Why didn't I have someone to pick a rose for me? Or someone to say they loved me and always would? I wiped my eyes. I looked out across the fields. I couldn't see Paris, but I knew it was there, with its theatres and happy people. One day I'll go there, I told myself. I'd find love on the streets of Paris, and I wouldn't steal, and my heart wouldn't feel pebble sore. That was what I wanted more than anything. The stars smiled quietly as I made my way home.